In 1994, a woman named Helen was startled by loud, aggressive knocks at the door of her home in Cannock Chase, England. Not expecting any visitors, a startled Helen, who was home alone, reluctantly got up from her chair and walked to the door. When she opened her door, she saw a strange little man who stood about 5 feet tall, staring at her with an unsettling grin. She said his skin looked almost white, and he looked anorexic. He wore a strange hat and a black suit with a white undershirt, and even though he had jet black hair, he looked very old. His bright red lips looked as if they had been painted on, and in a strange robotic voice he said to her, "We would ask that you cease your studies." "Studies? What studies?" Helen asked. "The skylights," the odd visitor replied. "Always the skylights. Cease and dream easy." Recalling the incident, Helen said, quote, "He gave me a long stare like he was going to attack me or something, but he didn't. He just walked away down the drive." Helen closed and locked the door, watching from her window as the strange man in black walked down the street until he was out of her view. She immediately thought of the only thing he could have been referring to. About a week before this encounter, Helen and her husband had seen strange lights in the sky late one evening and had been having disturbing dreams about strange-looking little men surrounding their car. Whoever this man was, after their unexpected meeting, Helen's home smelled of burnt rubber for weeks. She often felt dizzy and nauseous, and the smell was so terrible they had to call a professional cleaning service to get rid of the unexplainable stench. Could this man somehow have known she had been looking into UFOs in order to explain her and her husband's experience? Why did he wish her to cease her amateur investigation? Had something significant happened that night that she couldn't remember? And was this man, whether an entity from some earthly government or beyond, threatening her? Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to Paranormal Community College. My name is Riley, and today we are diving right back into the mysterious Men in Black. We'll check out some more modern cases, some cases involving women in black, and then discuss some theories. But make sure to listen to part 1 if you haven't already. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please just take a tiny moment of your time to hit that like, follow, or subscribe button, or send this podcast to anyone you know who is an alien paranormal weirdo like you and me. Also, just a quick side note, the story I used to introduce this episode comes from an area of Staffordshire, England, known as Cannock Chase, and in a few weeks I will be dedicating a whole episode to this area of the UK because it is rife with stories of the paranormal, in particular, the Black-Eyed Kids, so stick around for that one. But without further ado, let's jump straight into more stories of the infamous Men in Black. But first, let's have a quick little refresher on who the Men in Black are. So they are mysterious men who seem to show up into the lives of UFO witnesses and investigators. They question experiencers under the guise of being government agents, usually from the FBI or the British Ministry of Defense. They are described as being abnormally short or abnormally tall. On the shorter end, they are described as 5 feet tall or just under, and at the taller end, they are described as being well over 6 feet tall. Their skin may be either paper white, unnaturally white, or they may have olive skin and appear to be of Asian descent. They are always reported wearing crisp black suits while donning a 1940s style fedora or Homburg hat, although I've also come across accounts where they were wearing a bowler hat. Sometimes they are described as being noticeably hairless right down to their eyebrows and eyelashes, adding to their unnatural and not quite human appearance. So-called witnesses report that they feel as though these men in black, who often travel in groups of 2 or 3, have gone through their mail, and they keep harassing them with eerie phone calls. Phone calls where there's nothing but white noise on the other end. This harassment often leaves the witnesses in a constant state of dangerous paranoia, and they often abandon their paranormal pursuits altogether. Author and researcher of the Men in Black phenomenon, Nick Redfern, claims that this particular kind of paranoia seems to infect the very soul of the witness. On some occasions, they leave an odd sulfur-like odor behind them, and some witnesses claimed they felt ill after interacting with these beings. And where did the Men in Black stories originate from? They can all be traced back to a man known as Albert Bender in the 1950s. Remember, he was the sci-fi fan who founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau, as well as the UFO and alien-themed magazine Space Review. Albert Bender, who was known to be an oddball with moderate to severe OCD and paranoia, claimed Men in Black were harassing him via telephone and had broken into his house to search through his research materials. He would later on claim that these Men in Black were not simply agents of some government authority, but were aliens themselves, aliens who took him on an excursion to Antarctica, no less. At least, that's what he said. While Albert Bender eventually disappeared from UFO world, several UFO investigators, journalists, military personnel, and paranormal researchers claimed they encountered these strange men, and it wasn't long before civilian witnesses started coming forward as well. And so, let's get into some of those stories, shall we? So I know on Reddit and probably other areas of the internet, there are a lot of alleged Men in Black stories, but for this episode, I will be talking about the case files in Nick Redfern's book, The Real Men in Black. The reason being that I know Nick Redfern is talking about real people and real case files. Whether or not all of these stories are 100% true is another matter, but you can never tell where people on Reddit or YouTube are getting their stories from or if they're completely making them up. Nick Redfern has done a lot of research into the Men in Black and black-eyed children, and so I thought I'd go with the expert over people on the internet. So our first case is that of a woman named Raven Mendel. And Raven is a cryptozoologist and paranormal investigator, and in the late 2000s, she and her family started to experience a series of strange events. It started one day at their apartment. Raven and her husband were having a conversation when a cold gust of wind swooshed past them out of nowhere. Both keen to the world of the supernatural, they couldn't just write off the experience as a draft. The whole house started to feel odd, and as Raven continued to research UFO cases, the general aura of her house felt somehow disturbed. And things got really weird one day in April. Raven says, quote, "On April 16th, about 5:30 p.m., two men dressed all in black came out of the apartment across from where we were living at the time. The odd thing about this is that no one was living in that apartment then. They walked away and got into a black Lincoln. And when they walked past, I was outside playing with a Frisbee with a neighborhood kid. The Frisbee was called an alien flyer, which had an alien face on it, and I kind of thought that was a very odd synchronicity." She adds, "We smiled at the guys and made a joke about something, but they were like totally stone cold, chiseled, hard features, no emotion, nothing. One of them looked like he was in his late 20s or early 30s, and the other one was probably late 40s, early 50s. They were all in black, and they were both carrying briefcases." And while this may seem innocent enough, a couple weeks later, Raven was walking her dog when she noticed a black luxury type of car trailing her. She could see again that one of the men behind the car seemed to be older and one seemed to be younger, and she became especially frightened when the two men actually got out of the car. At this, Raven pulled out her cell phone and pretended she was talking on the phone. The men never approached her, just stared at her until they got back in their car and drove off. And okay, so just real quick, I find it hard to believe that someone can be researching a topic, let's say it's aliens or UFOs, Bigfoot, Mothman, whatever it may be, and some government or otherworldly kind of authority is like, "Okay, Miss So-and-so, you're getting too close and we must stop you from what?" What would happen if Raven investigated further into UFOs? Surely she hadn't at this point done more than, let's say, George Knapp or Jacques Vallée or James Fox or Jeremy Corbell, or people who have made very real headway in the UFO ordeal. What would they do? What would these Men in Black do if I, little old Riley, somehow cracked the case on the UFO question? Let's say I was going to go on TV and tell everyone what I'd figured out. I'd probably be doing them a favor because people will either ignore me or think I'm a crazy person, or it's just not going to be a big deal at all. I just have a hard time believing that any kind of government agency or extraterrestrial agency, let's say, cares what amateur investigators are up to. That's one of my biggest problems with the Men in Black, I guess. But I don't know though. Let me know your thoughts. I just don't think any kind of authority would be so concerned with what an investigator of History Channel's Monster Quest is up to. But anyway, paranormal activity at the house continued. One day, her daughter was taking a shower, and when she got out of the shower, there were 2 handprints on the bathroom mirror. One of them very large, as if someone had placed their hand on the mirror and dragged it down to the bottom. She and her family also experienced violent sleep paralysis episodes where it seemed as if some kind of malevolent, dark force was in the room with them. The paranormal activity and strange visitations spooked Raven so much that she eventually dropped her UFO studies and decided to stick with ghosts and cryptids instead. But okay, some of you might be thinking, wait a minute, where are the women in black? Well, to be honest, I'm not quite sure. However, I do have a few stories of women in black to share with you guys. And from beginning to end, this first one, I know this story sounds really fishy. I know it sounds like this eccentric Englishman might have just made this up, and perhaps that is the case. But let's suspend our disbelief for just a couple of minutes and talk about the encounter of Colin Perkins in the early 2000s. Colin Perkins had a passion, or perhaps obsession, with finding the final resting place of the legendary King Arthur, a man after my own heart, I see. And years of dedicated research and amateur investigation led him to believe that his tomb was located somewhere around an old abbey where he lived in Glastonbury, England. Towards the end of the year 2000, the trail to King Arthur's tomb seemed hotter than ever for Mr. Perks, like he was this close to having his eureka moment. And perhaps he was, because one night around 7 p.m., Mr. Perks received an odd phone call. The person on the other end of the line was a woman. She said she would like to meet with him to discuss his Arthurian studies. Now, this really confused Mr. Perks because while he was somewhat excited that some woman wanted to talk to him about his favorite little passion, how could she have known anything about him? How could she have known that he was looking for the final resting place of King Arthur? He had only told a couple close friends, and he certainly hadn't gone into any detail about it with anyone. Lest they, would think he was crazy. He thought to himself, something about this doesn't feel quite right, but what the hell? Sure, come on over and we can talk about King Arthur. And so she arrived at his doorstep at the agreed upon time, and when he opened the door, he was stunned to see a woman he described as the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She was 6 feet tall, had long, luxuriant black hair, she wore an elegant black suit, and had strikingly beautiful blue eyes. The two stared at each other blankly for a minute until Mr. Perk decides to invite her inside. And once inside, the woman identified herself as a Miss Sarah Key, and she said to him, quote, "Mr. Perks, I and several of my colleagues have followed your research closely the last few years." Mr. Perks said firmly, "Well, that's a bunch of rubbish. I have hardly told anyone about my research. I've never published anything at all, and if you knew anything about me, you'd know I keep to myself, and that's just how I like it." But she goes on to say, "But, oh, Mr. Perks, I do know a lot about you." She proceeds to go over every detail of his research, details he has never told a soul about, and that no one could possibly know he was looking into. Stuff that, as far as he was concerned, had only been scribbled down in his personal notebooks, dots that he had only connected himself. She seemed to be well acquainted with them, though. She told him that the tomb of King Arthur was indeed a gateway into another realm, a nightmare realm, and if he should persist in his activities, if that tomb should ever be opened, it would mean catastrophe not only for him or the little country of England, but quite possibly for the whole entire planet. Because if that gateway was open, all kinds of nightmarish creatures could cross over into our world. But I say, bring it on, because that kind of apocalypse sure as hell sounds a lot more exciting than the apocalypse we're doing now. But anyway, she warns him that if he continues down this path, someone else will come for him next time, and he wouldn't want that. No, he certainly wouldn't want that. The mystery woman eventually leaves, again politely warning him of what should happen if he continues his research. For a few months, Mr. Perks was startled enough to let it go for a while. He would still dabble in his research, his findings here and there, but not as obsessively. But eventually he had to scratch that itch. If someone, say from the British government or maybe even a representative from somewhere else, had come to warn him, he must be close, very close. And so he continued on his quest with renewed fervor. And one night in 2001, when he was driving home from the town of Bath, he noted that the road was oddly abandoned. This highway, albeit a country road, was usually somewhat busy with tourists going to and from Bath, which is in the vicinity of Stonehenge. But in the distance, his headlights caught a large figure. He rolled his car to a stop, and just a few feet away from him stood a giant creature with black, bat-like wings staring at him. Its skin was nearly see-through, and he could see its bones beneath the skin. It had 2 large pointy ears and 2 pointy fangs. And in his head he heard the words, "I warned you I would come." With that, the terrifying creature flew off from the road, and Mr. Perks hit the gas, eager to get away from that creature. He had the sinking feeling that the beautiful woman and that creature were one and the same. Now, I know this is a wild story, and to be honest, it sounds made up, and it very well may be. It started out kind of intriguing, but it is uber fishy to say the least. However, I am intrigued by the idea that these men in black, or women in black perhaps, may be from very real parts unknown. I'm intrigued, but I'm not quite convinced yet, but let me know what you guys think. And so there are some other women in black stories, although they may be few and far between. For example, in 1967 in West Virginia, where, by the way, a lot of these men in black encounters are said to have occurred, at least according to Mothman investigator John Keel, black sedans were noticed by several individuals. The men inside these black sedans claimed to be census takers and went from door to door inquiring about the number of children in each household. Alongside these encounters, a beautiful blonde woman in black was seen by various individuals. She appeared to be in her 30s and had a sweet southern accent. This woman claimed to be John Keel's secretary and was asking people about their experiences with UFOs or the Mothman of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. There's also a few encounters where witnesses are met by both a man and a woman in black, wearing old-fashioned clothes, driving in an old-fashioned car. The women in black are almost always described as strikingly beautiful, and in my head, I'm picturing the alien babes from Dude, Where's My Car? In the latex black suits and long ponytails. But one man from Ohio in 1985 claimed one of these women in black appeared in his bedroom to have sex with him. Under hypnosis, he said, quote, "She looked evil, but she looked pretty too." Bruce Lee, not the kung fu star, but an editor at New York publishers Morrow, walking along Lexington Avenue with his wife on a Saturday, went into a bookshop to see how books he had edited were displayed. A short couple, bundled up against the cold so that even their faces could hardly be seen, picked up copies of Strieber's abduction narrative Communion, a Morrow title. And he flicked through them impossibly fast, saying things like, "Oh, he's got this wrong, and he's got that wrong, this is made up, that's not true," things like that. Their accents, he said, were Upper East Side Jewish. Lee went up and asked what errors there might be in the book. The woman glared at him, and through her sunglasses, she could see enormous dark eyes, which reminded him those of a rabid dog. He hastily left with his wife, and they went to a bar to, quote, "soak their shock in margaritas." He concluded that they had been aliens who had presumably learned to speak English from Upper East Side Jews. And this story is something Whitley Strieber has actually talked about before with Art Bell on Coast to Coast, as well as with Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp on the Weaponized podcast. And in his opinion, in Whitley Strieber's opinion, who again is the guy who wrote Communion based on his own abduction experiences, according to Whitley, he believes that this little strange alien couple were kind of playing a joke on not only Whitley, but on Bruce Lee, this editor who happened to be at the bookstore that day. So, who knows? It's a very odd story. But anyway, before I get into some theories, I want to share just a few more stories that I found after I had already recorded some of this already. With the holidays and moving, I've kind of been all over the place, more all over the place than usual. And rather than omitting these stories, I'm just going to try to squeeze them in real quick. So here it goes. So in 1988, a Mexican woman by the name Maria, who was married to an Englishman from Cheltenham, told a journalist that there were extraterrestrials living in Cheltenham. She knew about them because they had communicated with her by telepathy, and then one day she saw two of them walking down the street. They had no hair, they wore hats to hide the lack of it on their heads, but she could nevertheless see that they had no eyebrows. I think she said that they wore black coats. They nodded at her as they went past. So definitely along the lines of the Men in Black being not of this world. And in 1996, the month of January, a Southern California's cover band took a break from a late-night jam session for a smoke when they all seemed to black out. They awoke 10 minutes later, but the lead singer had vanished. He reappeared 2 days later with some scars, and in the third week of February, he was sitting on the porch when a black Cadillac pulled up and three very pale, very bald men in black suits got out. He says, quote, "At first glance, they kind of looked Oriental, but a closer look let me know that they were not Oriental at all," end quote. And this is the 90s. I'm sorry, now Oriental is not the word to use, of course. But anyway, he said that they were the FBI and that they had to accompany them to their office to answer some questions. He hesitantly got into the car, which, though a 78 model, smelled like brand new. They drove him around for half an hour, warned him not to continue to talk about his alien abduction, and showed him a series of grisly pictures of mutilated bodies, which they said was, quote, "what happened to people who do not comply." They also showed a video footage of them killing people, and when he was returned, his friends took down the license plate, but the police told them that no such plate was registered in California or with the FBI. The victim put the story on a computer bulletin board, anonymously, of course, because he was afraid. And then we have, on January 10th, 2003, the Ministry of Defense's UFO desk received a call from a woman who said that in the small hours, she and her mother had seen lights in the sky from their home in East Dulwich, South London, and they feared this might be a terrorist attack. So she had called Peckham police, who eventually sent a car around. In it were two policemen and two men in spacesuits with dark glasses. And they happened to call themselves Mork and Mindy. These men told her not to look at the object because of possible radiation, and they carried a transmitter, or possibly a Geiger counter, which kept clicking. As the woman's eyes hurt from watching the lights, they offered to wash them out with a solution, but she declined. She was then told, quote, "not to talk to anyone about this, and certainly not the press, in case it caused panic." After they had asked the women for their birth signs, which I'm assuming birth signs maybe means like zodiac signs? I don't know. But anyway, after they asked them for their birth signs, they left. And when the Ministry of Defense contacted the police, they naturally denied the Mork and Mindy story, saying that they had only sent two officers without any radiation equipment, that the woman thought the lights were aliens, not terrorists, and that they themselves had been able to see them. Later, the mother wrote a letter of complaint stating that they had discovered that Mork and Mindy was a TV sitcom about an alien, and that they had been trying to, quote, "make them look foolish." And now I want to get into some theories, and to be honest, I'm kind of leaning towards the idea that this is all an urban legend that people got really carried away with. An urban legend that got so out of hand, it made people a little more paranoid than what is healthy. But let's look at some other theories. Theory number one is that these men belong to some sort of government agency, in particular, a government agency with a black budget. The kind of government agency that deals with the aliens and unexplained phenomena. And the purpose of these men in black is to intimidate witnesses into ceasing their investigations and staying away from the whole UFO business altogether. But that doesn't explain a couple of things. First, it doesn't explain their otherworldly appearance. They are abnormally short, have freakishly pale skin in some cases, are without body hair in other cases. The painted-on red lips is also a weird feature, and several of these so-called eyewitness accounts leave the experiencer physically ill. Which brings me to my second point. The strange physical evidence that is allegedly left behind by these men, the smell of sulfur, that dent in the file cabinet from part 1 of this series. Additionally, many say they are left feeling weak and nauseous, maybe even dizzy. And so if this isn't just an urban legend and these are just government agents of some kind, human government agents, what could possibly explain the sulfur smells, the illness that is sometimes left behind? And eventually we'll get into Jacques Vallée's case files and theories, but the smell of sulfur being left behind and the physical illness is actually extremely common in many abductee stories or just close encounter stories, so there could be something to that. But anyway, moving on to theory number 2, could they be representing an alien authority? Could they be aliens trying their best to masquerade as humans and attempt to scare witnesses into ceasing any activities involved with UFO disclosure or UFO investigation? But my thing with that is, would any other non-human intelligence really be that concerned by what the average Joe has to say about their experience with strange lights in the sky or encounters with little gray aliens? I wouldn't think so, but who knows? I don't personally know anyone of non-human intelligence, so who knows what they're up to or what concerns them. Others have said, well, perhaps they are time travelers. They do drive around in vintage cars that look as if they just rolled off the lot. They dress in 1950s and 1960s style attire. They talk in a strange manner of speech compared to us. But it still begs the question, why are they so concerned with those investigating UFOs or cryptids for that matter? Because we didn't even get into that, but those who have witnessed unproven and unknown creatures such as Bigfoot and the Mothman claim to have run-ins with the Men in Black as well. Or could they be from another timeline? Some kind of other parallel universe, perhaps? Could that explain their unusual behavior and unusual appearance? This presents us with another possible theory, and can you guess it? It's one of my favorites. If you've been listening for a while now, you probably know what I'm going to say. And that is, maybe these are beings of an interdimensional nature. Perhaps they are not beings from another planet, but another world next door to ours. Perhaps what people are seeing in the sky and in their bedrooms late at night are not extraterrestrial, but are visitors from another dimension. An interesting and quite compelling aspect of this theory is their similarity with the Hat Man phenomenon. The Hat Man is an entity seen by thousands all throughout the world. Being made of nothing more than shadow and darkness, the Hat Man appears to individuals usually during sleep paralysis, and he has that classic fedora-shaped hat. Furthermore, like the Men in Black, the Hat Man inspires a sense of deep fear and all-encompassing dread. And I guess the idea is that he appears to people in the form of a shadow person because he is from another dimension, and us here in the third dimension can only perceive these beings as shadows. But then, if the Men in Black are interdimensional, how are we able to perceive them sometimes? People who believe in the interdimensional theory as an explanation for various paranormal phenomena contend that these non-human entities are able to manifest a full physical body in our dimension, by means of which remains a mystery. And let's see here, are we forgetting any theories? Oh yes, a rather recent theory purported by other podcasts out there, and another theory I find rather intriguing is that these are tulpas. And if you don't know what tulpas are, they are essentially sentient thought forms, entities that have, in a way, been created by the thoughts, the collective consciousness, perhaps, of human beings. The idea is basically that if so many people believe in this one thing, like Bigfoot for example, that it can essentially manifest in our physical world, our physical reality. Basically, an urban legend becomes so believed in that the entity or phenomenon in question becomes real. This could explain why the Men in Black seem so odd and even absurd. If they are tulpas, they are kind of like incomplete creations. Therefore, of course, they don't know what mundane objects are and how they work. Perhaps they even find them fascinating, like the cases in part 1 where one of them seemed enthusiastically intrigued by that journalist's ballpoint pen. Maybe it could even explain their robotic voice and mannerisms and their not quite human appearance. Some people are of the opinion that the Men in Black and the black-eyed children may be connected in some way. They both have that not quite human appearance associated with the smell of sulfur or other unpleasant smells. They seem robotic or soulless, are both reported as having olive or pale white skin, and they evoke feelings of intense fear and dread from the witnesses. Some paranormal researchers have even suggested that perhaps the Men in Black are demonic in nature. Claudia Cunningham, one of these researchers, states, quote, "I know there is a supernatural world, And with the Men in Black, I think they are demonic. They're from the dark side and here to confuse us. I believe they're here to do a lot of mischief and can take on different forms. They can appear as a ghost, as a man in black, an alien. They're here to turn us away from God and drag us into darker areas. But has any witness ever been dragged into darker areas by these beings? Have they ever been physically harmed or even spiritually harmed? You could say that paranorma and fear is definitely a kind of supernatural attack. Demonic or not, though, if we are to believe these legends are more than legends, or even true perhaps, certainly there are not positive Men in Black encounters from what we've seen here anyway. But at the end of the day, I want to know what you guys think. Let me know if you have any other interesting Men in Black stories, or if you have some theories of your own that you'd like to share. Maybe you have some idea on who or what they are, or if the Men in Black is simply an urban legend. Next week, I'm going to be talking about the many abduction experiences of David Huggins. Abductions that, according to him, were of a very sexual nature, so you don't want to miss out on that one. So until then, thank you guys so much for listening, and take care, everyone.